We have the great Devin Nunes. How are you, sir?
It's great to be back on your show.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's your second time. You were the second guest originally. We've only had two guests twice. But what you're doing is very, very crucial to the nation. We're at a grave point in this country on whether you can impeach a president of the United States basically for anything. But let's start at the beginning. Who sets American foreign policy for the executive branch?
Well, despite what the State Department may think and what many congressmen and senators think, the President of the United States sets the policy. It's very clear.
Under Article 2, he makes the nominations for ambassadors. He welcomes the ambassadors from other countries. He negotiates treaties, sends them to the Senate. He's commander-in-chief. Now, tell me if I'm right or not. Last time I checked Article 2, there's not a State Department in there.
That's correct. And one of the points that I made last week very clearly is that the president can hire and fire at any time for any reason. There is nothing in the Constitution or anywhere else. The president decides who is representing him overseas.
Who's representing him overseas? Let's talk about this a little bit. Let's talk first about what took place Wednesday. You had two witnesses. Honest to God, I don't even know why they were there. These are two longtime bureaucrats who disagreed with the president's policies when it came to Ukraine. They thought that Ukraine should get a ton of money, get it right away, really with no conditions. The President of the United States is concerned about these corrupt regimes. By the way, not just Ukraine, all over the world. It's the same practice, is it not?
Well, the president was very clear that I think on foreign policy, he did not like money that we were spending overseas on anything, okay? I mean, he's very supportive of having a strong defense. But I think that made a lot of Republicans, even including myself back in the day, well, does this guy really know what's going on here? That, some of these global institutions are like NATO, they do serve a purpose. But, thank God, look at what he's done. Finally, what he was pointing out is that, and I think somebody had told him, hey, NATO's only paying 1%. They're supposed to pay 2% of their GDP into the till. Guess what? Now, finally, countries, the president's very clear. He won't take meetings. He doesn't want our State Department or our Defense Department working with these European countries and others that are part of NATO unless they have a plan to get to 2%. So this whole talk about bribery, extortion, quid pro quos, the president ran on these issues. And as far as he was concerned, when I know we're going to get to Ukraine, but Ukraine is a corrupt country. It's been a corrupt country. There was no signs out there, and there still are very few signs that Ukraine is like on the mend, right? You essentially just had a change of a candidate supported by some oligarchs to now a candidate supported by new oligarchs. It doesn't mean we're not looking forward to helping Ukraine to move into a better democratic and transparent government. But the president had every right. And matter of fact, the Congress actually stipulates that we can't be giving money to corrupt countries. So the whole idea that we'd be sitting in Congress going through an impeachment inquiry really makes no sense. And I'll just finish with this point. You talked about bringing in these ambassadors who the president has the right to fire at any time, like I just said. But these ambassadors were upset that the president somehow was going around them. Well, tough. And if you really look at it, I think the startling thing to me when we've been sitting down for 6 weeks now in what we jokingly call the Star Chamber, down in the basement of the Capitol, armed guards, 2 doors, all the transcripts are being put into the top secret classified computer system. You can't make this up, which is, of course, they accuse Trump of putting these calls into the top secret computer system. So we're putting these depositions into the top secret computer system. And you sit back and you think about it. I mean, it's like a cult down there. And then you've got all these media freaks that are sitting just 100 feet outside, just waiting for every word. Then what happened over the last 6 weeks, they leaked something out, and then they leaked something out. And we kept coming out of there saying, look, We understand there's a policy disagreement. People in the State Department didn't like that the president had a special envoy. He didn't like that the EU ambassador was going over to Ukraine. They didn't like that Rudy Giuliani was investigating what was happening in Ukraine. But tough luck. The president gets to make those calls.
This phrase, irregular channel, the Democrats, the bureaucrats are trying to create the impression with the American people that something irregular is taking place. We have a regular channel, which are the policies being pushed by the bureaucrats at the State Department, and an irregular channel with a president's special envoy. Now, just for historical purposes, virtually every president has had special envoys using this irregular channel. George Washington had John Jay, went around Jefferson. One of the most famous was Franklin Roosevelt. I know the left loves him. He had Harry Hopkins, who actually lived in the White House, negotiated with Stalin and Churchill and others, infuriated the bureaucracy at the State Department. Since the president sets foreign policy for the executive branch, don't we have this reversed? That is, isn't it the State Department that's doing the irregular things when they defy a president's policies?
Well, not only that, you had so many problems in Ukraine. So the Democrats, they hate to admit this, but their sources for the Fusion GPS company that they were paying to dig up the dirt on Trump that ultimately made its way into the FBI, there were Ukrainian sources there. Okay, so they were paying people to go into Ukraine and dig up dirt. Some of this dirt came from high-ranking Ukrainian officials, allegedly. But what we do know is there was another DNC operative that was working with Ukrainians, and the Ukrainian ambassador in Washington, D.C., publicly trashed the Trump campaign, which is almost unheard of for an ambassador, a sitting ambassador, to side with one party over another in Washington, D.C. Now, look, none of the ambassador corps, just like no one in the media, thought that President Trump was going to win. But I only know of one ambassador that actually publicly came out against the Trump campaign in 2016, and that was the Ukrainian ambassador, who was working very closely with DNC officials. So what's just amazing is the Democrats continue to say, oh, this is some kind of conspiracy theory that Ukrainians...
Wasn't it in Politico? Wasn't it in the New York Times?
It was in all the news media that they liked at the time. And yeah, they try to run from that very quickly. And so the fact that Rudy Giuliani would be in Ukraine or talking to Ukrainians about, hey, where's this dirt that's being dug up on my client? Okay, it would be dereliction of Rudy Giuliani's responsibilities as the personal attorney to the president while he's under investigation by Mueller. Remember, we spent 3 years with this Mueller nonsense. He had every right and responsibility to be over there. I was also interested in Ukraine. I say as the top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, as part of our investigation into FISA abuse and other matters, we were trying to figure out where was Fusion GPS getting this dirt? What Ukrainians were they? Are they legitimate? We were doing that as the legislative branch of government. Senator Grassley had sent letters asking for information on what were these DNC operatives doing, talking to Ukrainian government officials, and how did that information ultimately make its way to the FBI so that Mueller could run his investigation. These are all very important points. And so this whole idea that you're going to try to impeach the president because his lawyers over in or not literally in Ukraine, but trying to figure out what Ukrainians were feeding dirt into the FBI, I think it's a very relevant thing for his attorney to be doing. And in the process of all that, you end up with the Bidens, looking like...
Let me get to them in a minute. The President of the United States reads about this stuff, too, in liberal news outlets. 2016, Ukraine did what? The headline in Politico said they tried to sabotage his campaign. Their word, sabotage, by very liberal reporters, including this guy, Kenneth Vogel, who now works for the New York Times. The Attorney General's office, the official Department of Justice, and the U.S. Attorney for Connecticut are investigating this. They're investigating
The origins of the Russia.
the origins of the Russia interference in our election, which I thought the left and the Democrats wanted to get to the bottom to. But it seems like they bifurcated. Trump collusion, which there was none, and then everything before, and they don't want to hear about it.
Right.
When you sit there day in and day out in the Intelligence Committee and you listen to Schiff and these others trying to twist the Ukrainian scandal into an impeachable offense against the victim of the Ukrainian scandal, that is the President of the United States, this must drive you a little crazy.
Well, it's a bit like Groundhog Day because, they just switched like overnight, right? It was like a light switch. They went from, if Republicans talk to Russians, every Republican had to be investigated that talked to any Russian at any time. Now, all of a sudden, you've just flipped. Now, any Republican who talked to any Ukrainian at any time has to be investigated. I mean,
I'm in trouble then, you know why?
You can't even make it up.
My distant ancestry is Russian and Ukrainian.
Well, see,
I'm no fan of either, by the way.
You should come in and testify.
I have as much to say that's relevant as the witnesses they're bringing before the Intelligence Committee. I'm going to tell you something. I've watched these witnesses. They're long on resumes. I learned a lot about their grandparents and their wives and so forth and so on. I learned nothing firsthand, factual, whatsoever. Nothing. So the question becomes, when will they have any firsthand witnesses? You have Senator Johnson, who sat in on one of these meetings, who was on this program, sitting in that chair, said the President of the United States never, ever said anything like they're saying he said. He said, I don't know about them. They've been corrupt. I don't know about this new president. I don't want. He would say the same thing as you said. Whether it's NATO, they need to pay up. He changes policy on North Korea. He's changed policy on Syria, policy for the better on Israel. He's looking at Ukraine. He wants to change policy there. Within 24 hours of this Mueller thing being over, they switched to Ukraine. You think that's part of the strategy?
I do. I think that they had been looking at this for a while. I don't think they just didn't make this up about a phone call. I think there was, and then when that aid was withheld, that was their club that they were going to use. Right. That was the card they decided to play, and I think they were desperate because you're right, because they imploded. And I said this in my opening statement on Wednesday. They imploded. The Democrats imploded, in spectacular fashion with the Mueller report. Even the left-wing media outlets were bashing them. Now, I think to some degree they didn't want to talk about the truth, what was Mueller actually doing there for 2 years, and what really happened, who was really running the show, because it was clear that Mueller himself wasn't running the show. So I think it was a bit of a cover-up just to throw this thing under the rug and move on. And so I think there were very hardcore partisans. And if you look at at least at who is some of the people who we believe could be this whistleblower, even though we don't know because we've never been given the name. If you look at some of those names, they're all connected. They're all connected even back to the Russia hoax. So I think you had people that were very disappointed, very upset. And then on July 25th, you had someone that gets mad, calls all his buddies that were involved in the Russia hoax, and then they concoct this scheme. They go in and they talk to the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee. They then get advice, get a lawyer, go to the IG, here's how we'll do this.